to all humanity. In an age when space flight has come to seem almost routine, it is easy to overlook the dangers of travel by rocket and the difficulties of navigating the fierce outer atmosphere of the Earth. These astronauts knew the dangers, and they faced them willingly, knowing they had a high and noble purpose in life. Because of their courage and daring and idealism, we will miss them all the more. All Americans today are thinking as well of the families of these men and women who have been given this sudden shock and grief. You're not alone. Our entire nation grieves with you. And those you loved will always have the respect and gratitude of this country. The cause in which they died will continue. Mankind is led into the darkness beyond our world by the inspiration of discovery and the longing to understand. Our journey into space will go on. In the skies today, we saw destruction and tragedy. Yet farther than we can see, there is comfort and hope. In the words of the prophet Isaiah, lift your eyes and look to the heavens. Who created all these? He who brings out the starry hosts one by one and calls them each by name. Because of his great power and mighty strength, not one of them is missing. The same Creator who names the stars also knows the names of the 7 souls we mourn today. The crew of the shuttle Columbia did not return safely to Earth, yet we can pray that all are safely home. May God bless the grieving families, and may God continue to bless America.
President Bush, after returning from Camp David to the White House. Oh, he's coming back. Let's listen in. All right, we've obviously lost the signal from the president, and we'll try to figure out what that's all about in just a bit. But we know they didn't return safely to Earth, he said, but we know they are home. President Bush touching a chord today of sympathy for the family members who lost their loved ones. In Mission Control, they stood at rapt attention for the president as he addressed the nation and addressed them. They too feeling the loss there as we look at the scene there at Mission Control. Judy Woodruff, it's a difficult thing for a president to address a nation at this moment, isn't it?
It certainly is. And Miles, you know, right now, coming in the midst of the crisis the United States faces, the decision the president faces with regard to whether to go to war with Iraq, this was the last thing, I think, on the minds of, in all fairness, of the people who work with the president closely day in and day out. Of course, it was the last thing on all of our minds. Everyone has come to assume once again over the last 17 years that space flight is as safe as it possibly can be. We are reminded again today that it is subject to error, of what kind we don't know. But this is a day when the presidents, I think it's fair to say, earned their pay, because he had to make those calls to the families of the 7 astronauts, which has to be the hardest thing that any president ever has to do. You know, if you read anything of history, you know the presidents who speak to the widows of those lost in combat. It is a job that none of us would covet.
Indeed, indeed. Finding the right words and hearkening back to those words of Ronald Reagan, which are as poignant today as they were in 1986. We will never forget them, nor the last time we saw them this morning as they prepared for the journey and waved goodbye and slipped the surly bonds of earth to touch the face of God. George W. Bush, using the same sorts of parallels and symbolism and analogy and reference to faith at this terrible moment of tragedy and mourning here in the United States as it becomes evident that the Space Shuttle Columbia and her crew of 7 is now lost. Let's listen in one more time to that moment in Mission Control, that last transmission. Everything seemed to be going routine. You'll hear the voice of James Hartsfield, Public Affairs Officer for NASA in Houston, as well as some air-to-ground communication. At the other end in the shuttle is Rick Husband, the commander of the Space Shuttle. Let's listen in on that.
Toward Florida, now approaching the New Mexico-Texas border. Altitude 40 miles. Speed 13,200 miles per hour. Range to touchdown 1,400 miles. The shuttle in the left bank with wings angled about 57 degrees to horizontal.
And Columbia, Houston, we see your tire pressure messages and we did not copy your last.
Roger,
Half-staff at the White House. A nation begins a period of mourning for the crew of the Space Shuttle Columbia, 7 brave astronauts pushing the envelope, exploring the high frontier, and then inexplicably it all ends in an instant, 200,000 feet above the state of Texas. Before they left, I spoke with the first Israeli astronaut ever to travel to space, Ilan Ramon.
to tell you the truth, it was pretty fast. It was actually today, and it went too fast. It was partly or mostly cloudy, so I couldn't see much of Israel, just the north of Israel, and of course, I was excited.
Ilan Ramon, that was obviously while he was in flight. I apologize for that. That was the Saturday after launch. He was telling me what it was like to try to look down on his home country of Israel. Said he had a little difficulty finding it. Ultimately, he did get a good chance to see it and conducted a series of experiments, among other things, to test the links between dust particles in the air and global warming. Rick Husband was on his second flight, his first as a commander, and he talked a little bit about flying with Ilan Ramon.
Personally, the thing that I have really enjoyed the most about Ilan and his family is just their warmness and the openness that they have in sharing their home. And from my standpoint also, just learning more about Israel, learning more about, I'd say, the Jewish culture. And with myself, being a Christian, I take a specific interest in kind of the biblical or spiritual aspect as well, which has been a very interesting thing for me.
Rick Husband, as he referred to there, a devout Christian, learning a little bit about Judaism through the eyes of Ilan Ramon. Ilan Ramon and his crewmate on this mission, which was oft-delayed, series of problems with the shuttle and scheduling issues. Other missions took priority to the International Space Station. This mission finally taking off some 16 days ago and going up until that point at 9 a.m. Eastern Time this morning, up until that point, nearly flawlessly for the 7-person crew as they conducted a series of experiments, some 80 experiments in all, over the course of this 16-day mission. NASA is in the early stages of its investigation already. As you look at this tape from WFAA, shot from Dallas you can see what happens. What seems like a single streaky meteor quickly becomes 3, 4, 5 meteors as the Space Shuttle Columbia breaks up in midair, traveling 18 times the speed of sound at an altitude of some 40 miles above us. And that picture tells you what happened, but offers up many, many questions to us at this hour as to what could have happened, what might have caused it. A whole series of things will be discussed and looked at. And as one of the people we talked to earlier mentioned, an engineer who was involved in the Challenger investigation, no one in the early stages of Challenger could have anticipated that it came down to a rubber O-ring that was too brittle and thus allowed hot gases to spill from those solid rocket boosters on the side of the space shuttle, spill into the external tank and cause an explosion in there. That's ultimately what happened. At the initial stages after Challenger, they were looking at the main engines and something there. So it took some time for them to come up with that whole scenario. Eventually it was found, eventually it was fixed, and eventually they flew. It took the better part, 2 years, almost really 3 years, before the return to flight of the Space Shuttle Discovery. And that is probably the kind of time frame that we're going to be talking about here as the NASA and the country endeavors to find out precisely what happened to the Space Shuttle Columbia before any other shuttle leaves the launch pad at the Kennedy Space Center. Let's get a recap now from Darren in the newsroom. Darren?
All right, Miles, we're going to do a couple things here. We're going to do that recap, and we're also going to talk to some of the people who saw the shuttle or some of the debris coming down. First, a recap of today's tragic events, beginning with Space Shuttle Columbia making its descent to Earth. It broke up over Texas this morning. It was planned to land at Kennedy Space Center in Florida. When you look at the video, you can see fiery pieces falling from the shuttle. This is very much like the video that Miles was just showing you. As we're also watching from NASA lost contact with the shuttle around 9 a.m. Eastern. The shuttle, as you're watching it, was about 200,000 feet and traveling at speeds of 12,000 miles per hour when contact was lost. Government officials say terrorism is not suspected. The shuttle was simply too far away from Earth for that to take place. Debris from the shuttle rained down over east central Texas, and it goes all the way into Louisiana. Officials are warning that the debris could be hazardous and should be avoided, and they are certainly urging residents who find debris to immediately contact authorities. Do not go near it, do not touch it. Of course, we cannot forget the astronauts who lost their lives. 7 crew members aboard the shuttle were killed. NASA says their families at this point in time are definitely getting support.
I'd have to say the families are bearing up with an incredible amount of dignity considering their loss. We all grieve for them. We all pray with them for the crew. But one thing came across loud and clear when visiting with them is they knew that the crew was absolutely dedicated to the mission that they were performing. And I think you could see that in the video downlink. They believed in what they were doing. And in the conversations with the crew and their families, they said that we must find what happened and fix it and move on. And we can't let their sacrifice be in vain.
7 incredible astronauts on board the shuttle. Let's go ahead and put a face on the crew. Rick Husband was a 45-year-old commander of the Columbia crew. He also was an Air Force colonel. He comes from Amarillo, Texas. He says he made up his mind as a child that he would be an astronaut. It was his lifelong dream. Husband was selected as an astronaut back in 1994. Talk about perseverance. It took 4 tries until he was accepted into the astronaut program. William McCool was the pilot of Columbia and a Navy commander. He also comes from Texas, Lubbock, Texas. He was born in San Diego and was the father of 3 sons. McCool became an astronaut in 1996. He was making his first space flight. The payload commander, Michael Anderson, was 43 years old. He also was an Air Force lieutenant colonel who was born in Plattsburgh, New York. NASA selected Anderson back in 1994. He was one of only a handful of African-American astronauts. Kalpana Chawla was 41 years old. She is a very interesting story. She was born in Karnal, India. She immigrated to the U.S. in the 1980s. She became an astronaut in 1994. This was her second space flight. She is a national heroine back in her home country of India. David Brown was a 46-year-old Navy pilot and doctor. He was also a Navy captain. He was born in Arlington, Virginia. He joined the Navy after a medical internship. He became an astronaut in 1996, and Columbia was his first mission. Dr. Laurel Blair Salton Clark, she was the other woman on board. She, also 41 years old, a Navy commander and a flight surgeon. She became an astronaut in 1996. She lived in Racine, Wisconsin. She has an 8-year-old son. And then Ilan Ramon, Israel's first astronaut, a hero in his country. Ramon was a colonel in Israel's Air Force. His ancestors survived the Nazi death camp in Auschwitz. His wife and his 4 children live in Tel Aviv. And now we go back to exactly what took place early this morning. A lot of people saw what took place in the Texas area and then saw the debris rain down from Texas all the way to the Louisiana border, as we mentioned. Mark Davis is a talk radio host. He's in Dallas, Texas, and he's joining us on the phone right now. Mark is WPBN. Mark, thank you for joining us on this day.
Hi, no problem. WBAB in Dallas-Fort Worth, and it was in this area over North Texas, obviously, in the video imagery that people are seeing right now. This is what it looked like. There's not a whole lot of zoom that's on this particular video image, so I and some of my neighbors were out in our respective front yards engaging in a pretty normal space geek activity, watching a shuttle come in on the rare occasions that it appears over the North American skies. And just juxtaposing it with the last time we had this experience, it was a nighttime event about 10 o'clock in the evening, and far less of the sky was involved. It went from about 30 degrees up in the horizon, pretty well straight down to the southern horizon. This was a full 90 degrees of sky. The first bright sparkle of the shuttle re-entering came just exactly 8 o'clock our time, Central Time, and right above our heads. And then moving very slowly, taking every bit of a minute to go all the way down low in the southeastern sky on its way, of course, to Florida. The first difference, if anybody had seen any of these before, lucky enough to be out when a shuttle re-entry was in the sky before, is that it's usually a fairly clearly drawn single line of fire. This is, of course, a fireball in the sky any time a spacecraft re-enters the atmosphere. But to have sparkly things come off it was not immediately an item of panic, because anybody who's seen Apollo 13, where the special effects were quite competent, knows that things are going to fly off of a spacecraft that's re-entering the atmosphere. But would those things be so big that you could see them from 38 miles below? Would these things be so big that they would create their own separate contrail? Well, obviously the answers to that would be no, and that resulted in the wreckage that you guys are showing right now.
So, Mark, let me just jump here in a second and ask you, as you said, you're a self-professed space geek, a number of your neighborhood, so you had gone out to watch this re-entry, and you described what you thought it should have looked like from previous re-entries that you had watched. But at what point did you and your neighbors, as you were watching this, get a sense that something definitely was not right?
Well, it's kind of funny. To our interested but still relatively untrained eyes, the moment at which it was pretty clear that something bad was happening is after we all finished up a little conversation, said, wow, wasn't that neat, put our cameras and binoculars away, came back in, grabbed a refill of a pot of coffee, fired up CNN, and it wasn't landing. I mean, this is how fast this thing goes. At 12,000 miles an hour, it's directly over our heads in the Dallas-Fort Worth, Texas area at 8, due on the ground in Florida at 8:16. I was probably back in my house at about 8:10. I figured this is great. Shuttle landings have become so routine, as you well know. I'm sure your coverage plans this morning called for joining it a couple of minutes out from landing, where it's a little white speck, then it lands, everybody says that's great, and then you're back to, last night's basketball scores. Well, obviously it was not a normal landing, and there was no landing to cover, so that was when my phone starts ringing off the hook. I start calling everybody, and it's time to head in here to WBAP to do some coverage of our own.
Interesting, just to watch it by itself. You didn't really realize at the particular moment that something had gone so terribly wrong.
Well, no, and that's what's so different between now and almost exactly 17 years ago with the Shuttle Challenger. I was up early to watch that too, which probably, it's funny, the Challenger launch had a little bit of layperson interest because you had Krista McAuliffe, first teacher in space, so the ratings for that, for you guys and everybody else, were probably a smidgen higher than for the ordinary routine shuttle launch. For the Shuttle Challenger, the shuttle program had existed for about 5 years. Now it's existed for 2 decades. These flights are as normal as a jetliner taking off from your local airport. But yeah, we were there, and we were going to watch whatever coverage you guys provided. And when it became clear there was no landing to cover, all those feelings from 1986 are back. And Darren, I know covering it, and for us covering it here in Texas on radio, everything old is new again. Reagan's speech in '86, his biblical or godly references juxtaposed with President Bush's.
Mark, I'm sorry, I'm
just
going to kind of jump in here. Of course, you understand covering there from Texas. We do have a lot of other news to get in as we try to move the story forward. Thank you for joining us so much from Texas. Mark Davis, talk show radio host. Thank you so much. Now we want to move it up to Washington, D.C. and Judy Woodruff. Judy?
Thanks, Darren. Getting a sense from Mr. Davis, the perspective of so many different perspectives this morning, somebody who lives in the state of Texas and works in the news media. Darren, with us now, or somebody who will be with us in just a moment, was literally, I think you have to say, the face and the voice of space flight in the United States during the 1960s and the 1970s, really the beginning of the space program in our country, when we were all excited. School children would gather around to watch on television for every space flight that took off. He is none other than Walter Cronkite, a former CBS news anchor who's been retired now for some years, but has always maintained an interest in space flight, has over the years, as I said, his name literally became synonymous with NASA, with following so many of the earliest space flights. You know, if we saw it, we watched CBS, we watched Walter Cronkite. So CNN wanted to talk with Walter Cronkite, and he will be joining us now in just a moment. We're just pulling all the technical pieces together to get Mr. Cronkite on the air with us. And while we wait for that, he's going to be joining us from Manhattan. We want to go to Jerusalem, to Israel, the home country of one of the astronauts on this Space Shuttle Columbia mission. Joining us is Raanan Geeson. He is a spokesman for the Israeli Prime Minister Ariel Sharon. Mr. Geeson, we know President Bush called your Prime Minister just a short time ago. Can you tell us anything about their conversation?
Well, first of all, let me just say this is a very tragic and mournful day for the people of the United States, for the people of Israel, for the families of the astronauts, and but also a very sad day for all of humanity. And I think that was reflected in a conversation between President Bush and Prime Minister Sharon, which just took place a short while ago. The President said that it's a tragic day for science, it's a tragic day to the astronauts, and mentioned that on that space shuttle there was one brave Israeli citizen, Colonel Ilan Ramon, who has also died in this endeavor on behalf of all humanity. And he offered his personal condolences, as well as the condolences of the American people, to the family of Ramon and to the Israeli people. The Prime Minister reiterated and offered his sincere condolences to the families of the astronauts, and also said in his final words, he said that it's on these difficult and hard moments that the hearts of the American people and the hearts of the Israeli people are bound together. And at these difficult moments, we're holding hands together, and together we pray.
No question about it. Mr. Geeson, this question has been asked to some of your countrymen already today, but I want to ask you, what does it mean, what has it meant to Israel to have, for the first time, one of the astronauts aboard an American shuttle?
Well, it's not just a question of personal ambitions and personal pride, or I would say national pride that we have an astronaut there. But I think it's a reflection of the shared values that we share with the people of the United States. This is the quest for the stars, is to try and make a better world here on this earth. And we've been living through conflicts for the past 100 years here, and bloodshed. But this endeavor, this journey to space, reflected or encapsulated all the hopes of the Israeli people to see a better future, a better world here on this planet, in the little corner of the world where we live here in the Middle East.
How much personal interest had the Prime Minister taken in Mr. Ramon and this whole mission?
Well, that he conducted a conversation just about 10 days ago with Colonel Ramon to the space shuttle, and there was a exchange, which was broadcast here in Israel and captivated the audience. And I can recall Colonel Ramon saying that from above, from 280 kilometers, Israel and Jerusalem, they look like it's a tiny state, and but a beautiful one. And the Prime Minister said, you know, we will continue to support your dream. We will continue to support your vision and try to make Israel really the kind of beautiful state that you see it from above.
Those words from Renan Geeson, who speaks for the Prime Minister, newly re-elected, we should say, or newly re-chosen Prime Minister, Ariel Sharon. As I was saying just a moment ago, the man who was the face and the voice of American spaceflight during much of the 1960s, 1970s, and is Walter Cronkite, a former anchor for CBS News. He joins us now on the telephone. Walter Cronkite, you know, there have been some terrible tragedies. You've covered some of them, but here we have another tragedy in space, and it must bring back memories for you.
Well, indeed, of course, it does to all of us. It brings back the memory of the other great disaster we had out there with the Challenger, but it reminds us of other things too. It seems that we somehow are destined to be reminded from time to time of the dangers that we face in this exploration of space. You know, with our successes of flight after flight, we seem to fall into the mistaken belief that travel in that great void of space can be routine. And then we get these terrible reminders of how wrong we are, that we get reminded of the daring and the courage that marks those who understand the hazards and then so bravely undertake the missions for science and for their country. It's a reminder that it's too bad we can't keep in our noggins somehow, even in the days when things are going so well.
But we're talking to Walter Cronkite, but you know, early on, we were all very acutely aware, in the early days of the space program, of just how much risk was involved. How did that dissipate? How did that begin to slip away?
It dissipated normally because of the success of our flights. I said at the time when we were seeing these flights go for the first time, and we went through the one-man Mercury programs, the two-man Gemini programs, and then into the flights eventually to the moon. I said that with all the drama of that moment, there was going to, the day that we knew we were going to be a success with our space exploration was the day that we didn't pay any attention to the flights, that they went with the routine practically of airline schedules. And that's what's been happening, of course. Our shuttles have been rising and succeeding in their difficult task out there in space, even building this space city that we're now occupying with the Russians. The flights have become routine. It takes something like this to wake us up to the fact that this is not a routine business at all.
And we should continue to remind people, of course, that there are 3 astronauts in space now on the Russian space station. We're talking on the telephone with Walter Cronkite, who covered for the CBS News for so many years space travel. How are astronauts, how are these people who take this enormous risk, how are they different from you and me, from the rest of us?
Well, a great number of them, the professional flyers, of course, have chosen that career of risk in the first place by becoming not only ace pilots in the military services, but test pilots as well, in which every flight is loaded with danger of the unknown. They're trying out equipment that has never been flown in the air before. That is their career. To them, it is only another step to move into the uniform of an astronaut. For the others, the doctors, we had a couple aboard this flight. The specialists in one science or another who go in the pursuit of their science, they are extraordinary individuals. who have chosen to get out of the laboratory and the hospitals and learn the secrets of survival in space, and then they make these flights. I think we should applaud all of them.
Walter Cronkite talking with us on the telephone. Miles O'Brien, please join us.
Walter, I'd like to tap your deep reservoir of knowledge and memory. We remember Challenger so well and how long it took for NASA to get back in the skies. It was almost 3 years. Of course, the Apollo 1 fire, which happened 1967, January 27th, interesting, coincidentally, like the day before, there was less of a period of time because it was in the midst of the moon race. Those were very different days, weren't they?
Yeah, I didn't quite understand you. Is this
the period of time?
Is this Miles?
Yes, it is.
Yeah, right, Miles. I didn't quite understand. You're doing a great job this morning, by the way, Miles, as CNN and the rest of us now expect.
Well, thank you.
But I didn't quite understand your last question.
I was trying to remember how long it was from the Apollo 1 fire to the return to the Apollo missions. It was much quicker. It wasn't the full 3 years that we recall from the Challenger days.
That was a long one, of course. That was the longest delay. That was longer than the one I think that succeeded the Challenger disaster. I can't remember the exact numbers now, but it seems to me it was 2.5 years or more, wasn't it?
Yeah, well, I can't remember the numbers right off the top of my head, but what I'm trying to point out here is that there will be a fairly long period of time here for all of this to play it out. As Bill Reedy of the manned spaceflight had said, we got to find it, fix it, and resume. There is tremendous resilience to the space program, which you can attest to from its earlier days. I'm curious, do you feel confident that there will be a return to flight one day for the United States?
A return to what?
A return to space for people in the United States.
A return to space. Well, I don't think this will seriously interrupt our program. Of course, it's going to depend entirely on how early they're able to determine the cause of this tragedy and what it requires to fix it. That's the timetable that we face now. But we're committed to space. We're not going to desert the exploration of space because of a setback as tragic as it is. We're committed, and we're going to continue. The only debate, as you know now, in the space program, and I think this is the only debate that will continue, is the proportion that we devote to robotic space. The early experiments in landing on Mars with unmanned flight, and the devotion of time and expenditures of manned flight in space.
And that debate will continue regardless of the outcome of all of this.
Yes, absolutely. This may bolster to a degree the argument of those who claim we can do as much with robotic flight as we can with manned vehicles. But the argument for manned vehicles is still very strong, that the curiosity of the individual who's landing and walking on those distant orbs out there in space is of a value that cannot be replaced by machines who are simply communicating with men on Earth.
Do you think, Walter, that the American people, up until something like this happens, take this for granted, what we see routinely there?
Yes, I do. I think that, Miles, as well as any of us, that these shuttle flights don't even get in the newspapers, in the back pages, not even by the comic pages. There's no mention of the flights at all, unless indeed there is a daring deed out there in repairing the Hubble telescope or something of that kind, or helping to build additions on the Sky City out there, the international orbit. we don't pay any attention at all. It's just routine. It's as routine as the commuter trains running out of New York City.
It's
maybe more so.
Yeah, maybe more so. Let's take a look at that crew for just a moment. And I wonder, they go into it with not a blasé attitude. I know all these people, and I talk to them all the time, and what they tell you to a person is this is a real dicey proposition. It is risky business, and but a calculated risk. That's the term they use, and they go to space fully aware of those risks. And I was talking to Judy a little while ago about how different it is when you're talking about a group like this compared to the Challenger days when we had a civilian member of the crew, Christian McAuliffe. Do you think that's different in the mind of the American people?
Well, we know that those involved in the space program are fully aware of the dangers, the skill with which they put together the spacecraft, the precision with which the machinery is built to avoid things like happened today. And it's interesting, as you know well from your time around the space program, that our astronauts don't swagger through their day's work aground, but they are looked on at the same time by their fellow workers who are not astronauts, but in the ground crews, they are looked upon as heroes to be.
Walter Cronkite, much is made of the white scarf. We use that term, but the white scarf is perhaps a pejorative that doesn't fit for these people who fully understand the risks and are not out there, as you say, with that swagger. Walter Cronkite, thank you so much for being with us.
You bet, Miles. Hang in there.
All right. We are now going to turn our attention to a special guest who is joining on the line, who is enduring a particularly tough morning. June Scobie Rogers, the widow of the commander of the Space Shuttle Challenger, Dick Scobie, joining us on the line now from her home in Chattanooga, Tennessee. And June, it's got to be a terribly difficult thing to see this, particularly for someone who's been through what you've been through. Just tell us what you thought and what it's brought back for you.
Thank you, Miles. It's a tragic day for our nation, for the NASA family, and especially for the dear families of the Columbia crew. Our heartfelt prayers are for them. I know that they're flying back to Johnson Space Center now, and had calls wanting to talk to the commander's wife, and we're going to talk eventually. But it's something so difficult because a private loss is so public and that is shared with the nation.
Tell me, without violating the privacy of your conversation, what can be said between June Scobie Rogers and Evelyn Husband today? What can you tell her to ease her pain in any way?
Well, we could talk about the day, just getting through the day with your loved ones and friends and prayers, and to know that they're in the hands of God, that their loved ones have surely slipped those surly bonds of earth, and God's put out his hand and holds them. And I would want God to hold them close. There's so much to be concerned about with their families, and I would hope that they're taking care of themselves and that the NASA doctors are taking good care of them. To feel the prayers that the nation, when they say they're sending prayers, they are. And to feel the love of all of those people, and to know that we care so much for them and know their loss. It's so difficult, and it's such a tragedy, and it's so unfair that it happened. But the world knows how they died, and if they can just remember and hold on to the dream of what they were living for and what their mission was all about, then that dream will see them through.
Boy, those are tough words, and I know you've told me many times that in the wake of Challenger 17 years ago this past week, you really not even long after the incident, were talking to then Vice President Bush, and you expressed at that time your firm belief that your husband, Dick Scobie, would have wanted to see NASA press on. Do you feel, I know you don't know Rick Husband necessarily, but do you feel that that is the spirit of this crew?
What dare people? Yes, I can. Anyone who believes so much in the space mission of the discovery of opening new vistas into learning about the space frontier, they're living for that discovery of space exploration, and so many of them signed up to NASA to fly in space with vision and hope, and knowing that it would bring so much more information to our planet to help us with those dreams and fulfilling those dreams. I can't speak for the current Columbia crew, but if they signed up to fly with NASA, that must have been their dream that they would want fulfilled as well.
June Scobie Rogers, our best to you on this day, which must be particularly poignant and painful for you as well, and we appreciate you taking a few moments with us.
God bless you all.
God bless you. As she spoke, we were watching yet again that shot. You can see it right there on your screen. Somewhere south of Dallas, Texas, the Space Shuttle Columbia, about 9 a.m. Eastern Time, was streaking across Mach 18, 200,000 feet, and just went from a single fireball to multiple fireballs in an instant. Communication abruptly ended in the middle of a conversation from the commander, Rick Husband, and immediately prior to that, there's some indication of some problems with tire pressure. What that means, we don't know. It may be quite some time before we ever have any sense of what really happened and what caused the Space Shuttle Columbia to break up. But we've already seen the first steps toward that conclusion. First thing that flight controllers did in Houston was tell their people on those various consoles to put together their notes, capture their data, put notes in boxes, seal it up, get it ready for the investigation. Not long thereafter, we saw Sean O'Keefe, the NASA administrator, saying that the wheels were in motion already for an independent commission to get to the bottom of this particular incident, an independent commission that will ultimately report back to the nation and give NASA and the rest of the nation a sense of what went wrong. And then Bill Reedy, the head of the Human Spaceflight, Associate Administrator of Human Spaceflight, talking about finding it, fixing it, and moving on. Moving on will be a real challenge for NASA, depending on what comes out of this. Could take quite some time before we see another shuttle fly. It was almost 3 years from Challenger's accident until Discovery flew and the return to flight. We're now in the early stages. It's time for mourning. It's a time for questions. The answers will come much later. Judy?
Miles, as we keep showing that picture over and over again of the first sign of that something was had gone wrong visually, I keep thinking how hard it is to reconcile the beauty of the sky, the beautiful crystal blue sky over the state of Texas with that thin white vapor trail, how hard it is to reconcile that with the awful thing that happened. And it reminds me of the Challenger. The picture itself was spectacular. It was red and white and the blue background, and here again a beautiful blue sky, and yet concealing a horrific accident that's taken the lives of those 7 brave people. President Bush learned of this, we are told, just shortly after NASA realized what had happened, about 9:15 this morning Eastern Time. He was at Camp David. He made his way pretty soon after that back into Washington, Camp David, of course, being in the Catoctin Mountains outside of Washington in Maryland. Now you see this is a live picture of the White House, a flag there flying over the White House at half-staff. And it was just about 45 minutes ago that President Bush addressed the nation.
At 9 o'clock this morning, Mission Control in Houston lost contact with our Space Shuttle Columbia. A short time later, debris was seen falling from the skies above Texas. The Columbia is lost. There are no survivors. On board was a crew of 7. Colonel Rick Husband, Lieutenant Colonel Michael Anderson, Commander Laurel Clark, Captain David Brown, Commander William McCool, Dr. Kulpna Shavla, and Ilan Ramon, a colonel in the Israeli Air Force. These men and women assumed great risk in the service to all humanity. In an age when space flight has come to seem almost routine, it is easy to overlook the dangers of travel by rocket and the difficulties of navigating the fierce outer atmosphere of the Earth. These astronauts knew the dangers, and they faced them willingly, knowing they had a high and noble purpose in life. Because of their courage and daring and idealism, we will miss them all the more. All Americans today are thinking as well of the families of these men and women who have been given this sudden shock and grief. You're not alone. Our entire nation grieves with you. And those you loved will always have the respect and gratitude of this country. The cause in which they died will continue. Mankind is led into the darkness beyond our world by the inspiration of discovery and the longing to understand. Our journey into space will go on. In the skies today, we saw destruction and tragedy. Yet farther than we can see, there is comfort and hope. In the words of the prophet Isaiah, lift your eyes and look to the heavens. Who created all these? He who brings out the starry hosts one by one and calls them each by name. Because of his great power and mighty strength, not one of them is missing. The same Creator who names the stars also knows the names of the 7 souls we mourn today. The crew of the shuttle Columbia did not return safely to Earth, yet we can pray that all are safely home. May God bless the grieving families, and may God continue to bless America.
President Bush, who spoke to the nation about 50 minutes ago, we're replaying the president's remarks. The words at the end, I think we all carry with us in our hearts. The crew of the shuttle Columbia did not return safely to Earth, yet we can pray that all are safely home. I think we also should note the president made it a point to say the cause in which they died will continue. Our journey into space will go on. We've been talking all morning about, in the aftermath of the tragedy 17 years ago when the Space Shuttle Challenger exploded shortly after it lifted off. There was a hiatus, 2.5, 3 years before the shuttle program resumed. There were a lot of questions raised, many doubts about whether space flight, manned space flight in that form should continue. Now it seems there is less questioning. I think there's more of an assumption that it will go on. Yes, there will be an investigation. Yes, there will be, investigators will go over every piece of information, every piece of data, all the debris. In fact, we've just been told that the Air National Guard in the state of Louisiana, our Barbara Starr at the Pentagon is telling us, is broadening their search. They're looking over a very wide area, not just we know in Texas, but in Louisiana, perhaps in Arkansas, and elsewhere. making sure that every piece of debris that came down from the Space Shuttle Columbia, anything that came down from that shuttle, is retrieved. We're waiting for a second NASA briefing. This one, we're told, is going to be more on the technical side, but every piece of information is important at this point when we know so little about what happened. We can only speculate, and I know my colleague Miles O'Brien in Atlanta, you've been asking some very good questions of these former astronauts and others who know the space program, but there have to be millions of pieces of information that have to come together before they're going to know any answers.
Yeah, I think that isn't an overstatement, Judy. There probably are millions of little pieces of data that which will have to come together and put this puzzle together. The first sense of where this investigation is headed will hopefully become evident to us when we hear from the shuttle program manager, Ron Dittemore, and Chief Flight Director, Milt Heflin. They'll be joining us live out of the Johnson Space Center in Houston, which is the home of the astronauts and the home of Mission Control. As you well know, they expect to be addressing the nation and NASA, all of us, in the next 5 minutes or so. We expect to hear from them. A little while ago, we were talking about the gaps. It was 2.5 years or almost 3 years, really, between the Space Shuttle Challenger disaster and the flight of Discovery, the return to flight. It was inside 2 years from the Apollo 1 fire to Apollo 7, which was the first manned Apollo mission. Went from January 27th, 1967 to October 11th, 1968. It was right in the absolute heat of the space race, and they completely redesigned the Apollo capsule in the course of that process. That was a different era. Don't expect to see that kind of level of support. The funding levels are just do not equate to those days of the space race, the heart of the moon race. But throughout all of this, NASA will put safety first. NASA has put safety, has put NASA's safety issue, has been first for quite some time. Prior to Challenger, there was a desperate attempt on the NASA's part to prove that it was an operational vehicle with airliner capabilities. And at that time, it became very evident in the course of that investigation that NASA managers themselves were fooling themselves on the safety and ignored engineers who told them that there were serious problems launching shuttles in the cold weather, and they did it nonetheless. I can tell you from my experience, NASA post-Challenger does not have that attitude, and every last little piece of those shuttles is poured over with a mind towards safety, and the flights are flown with safety first. NASA no longer is trying to prove anything of an operational nature with the shuttle. There's a recognition it still is an experimental vehicle. Let's go to Nick Furman, who's had some experience on Capitol Hill with the space program, and who has worked as a space analyst. Nick, let's put this in perspective from the political side of it. We were talking about how inside 2 years they completely redesigned an Apollo vehicle after the Apollo 1 fire. And then the post-Challenger, almost 3 years. Is this, it's hard to say, but how long does an investigation like this take? How long before the nation's ready to fly again?
Oh, this is the day, of course, all of us dread, and that NASA, not the least of which, Bill Reedy and others work to defy, and defying this dreaded day is really what running the shuttle is all about, as you know. I think it could take a long time. I believe the cause that we discovered in Challenger was so obscure. It was a confluence of horrible accidents. It wasn't just the O-ring, it was where the O-ring broke. And as a result of that, putting those tiny pieces together, looking at the 1 million signatures that were signed off to launch this shuttle 2 weeks ago, all of the paperwork, all of the work that was done on the Columbia orbiter recently, the upgrades, was something left behind? Was a sponge left in, like they worry about in surgery? All of the paperwork is going to be examined and combed through to see if there isn't some vulnerability that laid on top of yet another vulnerability. And that's how complicated it'll be, and it'll take a long time.
When you talk about, and Judy used the term millions of pieces of data, and at first I thought, wow, but that's really what we're talking about, literally, as the flight controllers cart up page after page of documentation. There is one thing that we can say safely: every piece of data relating to that vehicle is now in the hands of Mission Control.
Well, I hope it is. I mean, every piece of data, you know, includes things like the test that was done on the glue that holds the tiles to the orbiter. The weld inspections that were done when Columbia was in for its major upgrade. You know, that's the degree of detail and paper that's around, and it's not just at Houston or at Cape Canaveral. It's in California and other places, and laboratories around the country where the work was done. So it's a lot to pull together.
Well, it's often interesting though, and you talk about this paper. Everything that is done on a shuttle is associated with paper. There's a saying that the shuttle is not ready to launch until the stack of paper equals the height of the shuttle stack on the launch pad. But what that does is it does give these engineers something to go back to and in a very comprehensive way say, this particular tile was glued on this particular way.
That's right, but you know, every time something bad happens, you'll notice that all the paper was signed. You know, there have been a lot of almost terrible things that have happened in the shuttle program. One time they closed up the back of the payload bay and went to turn the shuttle up to carry it, to mate it to the rest of the stack, to the boosters and to the fuel tank, and they heard a large clunk. Well, it turns out that the scaffolding that was in the payload bay was left in the payload bay before they did that maneuver, and so, you know, all the paper was signed.
Yeah, those things do happen. We are talking about something that involves, after all, human beings.
Well, it's a human tragedy, but we're the only creatures on the face of the earth that actually explore. You know, animals don't go exploring. Humans are unique. We're one of a kind, and I think we'll keep doing it.
All right, good words to leave it on. Nick Furman, space analyst, thank you very much for being with us. Let's send it over to Darren and give you a recap on what's been going on all this morning.
All right, top of everything, Miles, we want to remind everybody we're expecting just about now for there to be another news conference out of NASA, 3 p.m. Eastern. As soon as that does begin, you'll see that live right here on CNN. That will be the second update that has come from NASA since this tragedy occurred at 9 a.m. Eastern this morning. While we are waiting for that news conference to begin, let's go ahead and recap for our viewers who are joining us what we do know. The nation is mourning the deaths of the 7 members of the Space Shuttle Columbia. A recap of the morning's tragedy as NASA officials notified President Bush and Homeland Defense Secretary Tom Ridge that Columbia did not make its scheduled landing. At around 9 Eastern, Mission Control lost contact with the orbiter. Witnesses in Texas and Louisiana watched the spacecraft break apart. It was some 200,000 feet above the ground. These pictures that you're watching right now. At that altitude, experts say an act of terrorism was probably not the cause of what went wrong this morning. President Bush cut short his stay at Camp David to return to Washington and to address the nation. Here is some of that speech.
This day has brought terrible news and great sadness to our country. At 9 o'clock this morning, Mission Control in Houston lost contact with our Space Shuttle Columbia. A short time later, debris was seen falling from the skies above Texas. The Columbia is lost. There are no survivors.
More now on the debris. Search and recovery teams have been deployed from Fort Hood, Texas to look for that debris. It has been reported across a 100-mile wide area of Texas and into Louisiana. Officials are warning people stay away from anything that might look like a piece of potentially hazardous wreckage. Let us not forget the astronauts who lost their lives this morning. Among the 7 Columbia crew members, Commander Rick Husband was at the helm, along with the pilot William McCool, Colonel Ilan Ramon, that was Israel's first astronaut in space. Also payload commander Michael Anderson, mission specialist David Brown, Kalpana Chawla, and Laurel Clark were the 2 women on board. We are getting word on the NASA briefing. We're expecting to start at the top of the hour. A 15-minute delay right now. Current word, 3:15 p.m. Eastern. That news briefing will begin, and you'll see that live here on CNN. Meanwhile, more now on the debris field. As we mentioned, it is very large. When anything falls from that far high up, it's going to spread over a large area. Our Ed Lavandera is at one site where some debris has been spotted in Nacogdoches, Texas, and he tells us more about that. Ed.
Hi, Darren. We're about 2 blocks south of downtown Nacogdoches, and as we've driven in from Dallas this morning, and we have crews that have gone in through the Palestine area into Nacogdoches as well, and scenes like this are very common throughout East Texas. This is just a small piece of debris. As you can see here, it's been roped off. A lot of people have been coming here, gathering, taking pictures, and all over Nacogdoches from what I've seen here. We just arrived in the city about half an hour ago. and have been able to see in various spots where little pieces of debris have been roped off, not only here by military folks here, but we've also seen places as we were driving in where I think farmers had roped off the area, telling people to keep on moving through. So not just the official help here in this area helping out this situation, a lot of people who just live in the more rural areas outside of Nacogdoches taking it